morning, kids. Even though Talk TV is a crap stain on the toilet bowl of political conversation in the UK, I went on there this week to find out how the politicians behind Brexit are defending themselves now that everybody can see that Brexit is a disaster. Because as you'll see in a couple of minutes, it ranges from the bog standard political misinformation that we're used to the genuinely criminally insane. In this case, Alexandra Philips, one of the elected MEPs of Nigel Farage's Brexit Party. Now the whole thing lasted 20 minutes, so I'm going to break down some of the highlights.
Oh, Brexit, the would-be bogeyman responsible for everything. Well, that's what they would have you believe.
That's 5 seconds in and she's already spewing misinformation.
Yeah, you say that we blame everything on Brexit. That's obviously not the case. That's what we call a straw man, where you pretend that your opponent is making an argument that they're not, a ludicrous argument to pretend that their one's being unreasonable. We say that Brexit is making things worse. We know that COVID exists. We know that Ukraine exists. We know that those things are bad and making things worse. Brexit is something that's kicking us while we're down.
Now, obviously, we start with the economy, so watch how this back and forth goes.
It's made pretty much every sector of the UK economy worse.
I don't think that's actually qualifiable.
So she started us off with a very predictable denial, but fortunately, I brought receipts.
If you're going to question whether or not this is the case, as for example, food prices, those have gone up. If we're going to talk the NHS, the Nuffield Trust, the top medical charity in the UK, says Brexit is making medicines more expensive and making it harder to employ doctors and nurses from the EU. If we're talking small businesses, 1 in 5 unable to sell with the EU. They've also, majority of them are having difficulties.
But she tries to dismiss it by saying...
When people turn around and say sweeping statements like, oh, well, Brexit is responsible for the economy being, worse in every single sector, no one's ever able to clarify this. And why?
I just clarified.
No, you did. If you could give me one very pertinent example of an actual big Brexit change that's happened that is having a real-time effect, I'd be very keen to hear that.
Yeah, so the Federation of Small Businesses, which represents small businesses across the UK, they say that the extra bureaucracy at the border, because there are now different laws on either side of the border, adds red tape. Stuff has to be checked. You have to fill in forms, etc. That adds cost, that adds time, which makes their prices go up. That affects those businesses themselves. It affects their profit margins. It also affects the consumers on the other end.
She asked me to give her a concrete example as to how Brexit is damaging our economy. I did exactly that, but that's not good enough, and so she goes on to say...
But the thing is, when you mention things like red tape, the EU itself churns out red tape.
You say that the EU churns out red tape. That was what we were sold in 2016. We have to get rid of all these laws on bananas and pillows and stuff like that. Whereas, in fact, we're always going to end up regulating these things ourselves. If we do it separately to the EU, then that means there's a barrier between us and the EU because the laws are different on either side. And that adds cost to business, that increases prices, that lowers quality of life.
And that's the thing. All the slogans and propaganda from 2016 sounds stupid today because we can actually see that it clearly wasn't true. And so here's the next strategy that they love to use.
Now, food prices have gone up. Part of that might be due to certain imports have been restricted due to weather conditions in North Africa, in Spain. Another part of that, as you know, is because of the war in Ukraine, putting up the price of oil, putting up the price of wheat. That's happened internationally. I do think
Everything
that we
with
need
Brexit.
to get... I think... No. See, this is what I started out with saying, but somehow it's all Brexit's fault.
No.
It really is not.
Here's the thing. I started off by saying nobody here or nobody on my side of the argument is trying to blame everything on Brexit. You are the one taking the extreme position of it's everything except Brexit. We are willing to accept that it's Ukraine, that it's COVID, that it's weather. Everything is allowed to be impacting our economy except for the thing that we said was going to make a major difference to everybody.
This is how you know that these people aren't acting rationally, because in 2016 they told us that being in the EU affected every area of our lives, and now that we're out of the EU and things are going wrong, suddenly being out of the EU has no effect on any part of our lives. And they're willing to point fingers at everything from the weather to Vladimir Putin as long as you don't point them at Brexit.
Is Brexit increasing food prices?
There will be elements of Brexit which has an impact as we go through the stage of transitioning to rolling out our own trade deals. I think minimally, if you look at in the context of, I think
during
if you
a cost
look
of living crisis,
the overwhelming cause of rising food costs is nothing to do with leaving the EU.
But it has added 6%. It has added 6% to food prices, according to the Bank of England. Now, they are a body of economists. Neither of us sitting here are economists. So as far as the best minds of the economy in the country, they are saying it's increased food prices by 6%. And right now, low-income families are skipping meals to keep their kids fed. That is what you, former MEP of the Brexit Party, have done to them.
And credit where it's due, she doesn't actually argue back against that, she simply allows me to move on to the next topic.
You say that being in the EU suppressed wages through immigration.
Of course it did, hugely.
Here's the thing. Right now we've got major labour shortages across the country. Our economy is desperately crying out for workers. So if we know that immigration and people from other countries are a net benefit to our economy, and we know that because the study... Let me finish. if we know that they contribute more in tax because they statistically were more likely to be in work because they come here to work.
That's not true. That's not
Brexit.
true. The OBR actually said that the incoming migrants at the moment have no greater engagement in the labour market than the domestic population.
As for the OBR, they said that the most recent, i.e. the post-Brexit immigration is less beneficial to our economy than the pre-Brexit immigration. That's what you've done.
Now, there's a long back and forth arguing over this point, and I'll put the link to the full discussion below, but let me just read out what the OBR actually said. In 2021, 70% of UK residents born outside of the UK were aged between 26 and 64, whereas only 48% of those born in the UK were in this age group. And then it goes on to say that because there aren't that many work visas among the new arrivals, the participation rate of migrants under the post-Brexit regime will be lower than in the past. So she tried to do her research, and that research proves that she's wrong.
But as for wage suppression, if we know that immigration is a net benefit to our economy,
which
it is the responsibility of government to make sure that that benefit is shared equally across society by ensuring that workers have the ability to push for better wages, which is why people go on strike. And right now, the Get Brexit Done government is clamping down on strikes. You have no interest in actually improving people's quality of life because you've made it worse at every stage.
But the main argument these people use is that Brexit simply hasn't been done right, and that if they were in charge, they'd have made a huge success of it. And if you want to, go watch the full video below where she goes on about how amazing her Brexit would have been. But the main problem these people have is that we can still remember what they said during the negotiations. For example, Boris Johnson said this.
I think it's a great shame that we've missed the opportunity to come out at no deal.
He explicitly wanted no deal, just like the Brexit Party.
You're trying to deny blame for this, that it's the government, that you would have done it better. For starters, you were a member of the Brexit Party. Your official policy was a no-deal Brexit. That was your policy.
Yeah.
So all the non-tariff barriers, all the tariff barriers would have been 10 times worse. We would have
not under WTO
under WTO rules, we would have had to.
But actually,
the EU would have had to apply the same standard tariffs to all UK products. Half of all fish caught in the UK went to the EU. That would have meant tariffs on all fish going to the EU. That is what you would have done.
Which of course she denies, and so I have to make it simple.
No, was your policy not a no-deal Brexit?
Absolutely,
Yes.
and I can explain why the withdrawal agreement is dreadful, and I still stand by that.
And a no-deal Brexit would have forced the EU to put tariffs on UK products. Yes?
Why would it? No, I don't think it would necessarily have done, because actually when it comes
under WTO rules,
actually it'd be in the EU's gift to not do that.
But they wouldn't be allowed to under WTO rules.
Yeah, but you can actually easily come up with a free trade agreement between two partners.
So that's not no deal. That's not no deal.
That's
not no deal.
That's called a free trade agreement.
That's
It's
not
very
no deal.
different from the withdrawal agreement that we currently have. No, you leave with no deal, and if you leave with no deal and then go from the WTO prospectus, and then on top of that you then work out a free trade agreement in a way that sectorally benefits you, as all other countries that trade with the EU basically do, Femi.
Alex,
you don't have to be a member of a political project to trade with it.
Alex, this is insane. Your policy was a no deal. And when
Right.
I point out how damaging that would be, you say no, but we'd have a deal. No deal. No,
No,
it's a deal.
Femi.
No deal is somehow a deal. It's genuinely madness.
Femi, there's
What
a
you're
vast
doing is
difference.
madness.
Femi,
So what she's saying is that we should have left the EU without any trade deal at all, meaning all the tariffs then go on immediately, and then try to negotiate individual trade agreements for each individual sector of the economy one by one, which would obviously take years, and so we would have been going through all the consequences of no deal during the pandemic. And just so we're all clear about how fucking demented that is, here's a warning from the British Medical Association in 2018. They represent about 140,000 doctors across the UK, and they said that a no-deal Brexit would make us more vulnerable to deadly pandemics. And today, in 2023, here's a politician from the Brexit Party who knows that we went through a pandemic, still insisting that we should have gone through a no deal at the same time. Like I said, criminally insane. And then she goes on to blame the Tories for the Brexit deal as if I haven't just explained that people like her would not have done any better.
But the main point here is you point out the problems with Boris Johnson's deal. And I agree, Boris Johnson's deal. And the thing is, we warned you. We warned you. You lost the democratic argument on Brexit in 2019. Do you know how? Because you knew that people in this country would rather stay in the EU than leave on Boris Johnson's terms. Yet you stood down candidates to help Boris Johnson win and force us out of the EU on his terms. In fact, Nigel Farage even said that in a referendum between Boris Johnson's deal and Remain, quote, Remain wins that referendum and wins it every single time. You deliberately defied the will of the British people.
Thank you for putting words in my mouth. So first of all, I didn't agree with the standing down of candidates, but that happens in political parties. I know it did.
Everything I'm hearing is this is not the Brexit that we voted for. That's everything that I'm hearing from you. And yet we warned you for 3 years straight that you would not get the Brexit you voted for, that there needed to be some sort of democratic lock to make sure that whatever deal we ended up with the EU was preferable to Remain, that people wanted it more than remaining in EU. And clearly, everything you've said today shows that you failed on that point. And the cost of that is that people in this country are poorer for it. Every sector of the UK economy worse. During the worst cost of living crisis we've had since 1956. That is what you've done, and you did it undemocratically, knowing that people did not want it.
Now, by all means, go watch the full version, because I've obviously cut out a lot of what she said. Most of it's a mix of complaining about Boris Johnson's deal while recycling old arguments from 2016 about how EU membership is bad for us. But none of that matters anymore because of two very simple points. One, it's clear to everybody that Brexit is making life in the UK harder. Two, it's clear from everything I just said that the Brexiteers like her who complain about Brexit would have made things even worse if they were in charge. Now, because I actually set foot in the Talk TV studios, I think I'm going to go for another shower. Have a great week.